You have been alone long enough, Master Norris, and I have decided to do something about it, said old Bess Hartley, planting the tea tray down on his desk with the firmness of a woman who had wiped his nose at 3 and saw no reason to mince matters at 35. I have picked the girl already. You needn't trouble yourself about that part. The Duke of Pyckford did not look up from his ledgers. Bess, he said, with the patience of long suffering, you cannot pick me a wife as you pick the apples for a pie. Can I not? It was not a question. The old nurse, who had nursed his father before him and ruled the below stairs of Pyckford with a worn shawl about her shoulders and an iron will beneath it, settled herself uninvited into the chair across from him. You are a good man going to waste in a cold house, and it grieves me. I have served 3 generations of Pyckfords, and I will not go to my grave with you the last of the line, rattling about these halls like a dried pea in a drum. The girl is a Miss Nesta Wilde, companion to old Lady Crane up the valley, kind as the day is long, sensible, and not the least bit dazzled by a title, which, given your temper, is the only sort who'd have you. I have not asked to be had, said the Duke. No, agreed Bess placidly, pouring his tea, which is precisely why I must ask on your behalf. He ought to have forbidden it. He told himself, after she had bustled out, that he would forbid it properly the next day. But the next day Lady Crane was taken poorly, and who should be sent down from the great house to sit with her, for Bess and Lady Crane's housekeeper were thick as thieves, but Miss Nesta Wilde herself. The Duke came upon her in the morning room, where she had been settled with the invalid and a pot of tea, and he stopped in the doorway, intending only to be civil and brief. She rose at once and curtsied, and he saw a young woman of perhaps 24, plainly dressed, with a gentle, intelligent face and a few curls escaping a simple knot. There was nothing of the simpering debutante about her. She looked at him directly, with neither fear of his rank nor any silly eagerness to please it. Your Grace, she said, forgive the intrusion. Lady Crane would not be parted from me, and your good Mrs. Hartley insisted there was room. I hope I do not disturb you. You do not, said the Duke, surprising himself, for he had meant to say that she did. Is Lady Crane comfortable? She is sleeping now, thank you. She frets less when she is read to. I have been reading to her since dawn. Miss Wilde smiled, a little ruefully. I fear I have exhausted Mrs. Radcliffe and most of the Psalms. It was a small thing, a tired joke kindly meant. But the Duke, who had not been made to smile in his own house in longer than he could recall, found the corner of his mouth turning up before he could stop it. He covered it with a cough and a stiff bow and withdrew, and did not understand, going down the corridor, why his step was lighter than it had been that morning. Bess Hartley, watching from the servants' passage with a fan she had no earthly use for tucked into her apron string, smiled the smile of a general whose first skirmish has gone exactly to plan. After that, Nesta Wilde was always somehow about. Lady Crane's recovery proved conveniently slow, and during it her companion was forever being summoned to Pyckford on errands of mercy, to bring a tincture Bess swore only she could fetch, to sit with the old lady in the conservatory where, by happy chance, the Duke took his afternoon air, to consult the great Pyckford library for a book of sermons that, equally by chance, sat on a high shelf the Duke alone could reach. He was not a fool. By the third such happy chance he understood very well that he was being managed, herded like a beast to a gate, and he resolved, with all the wounded dignity of a long solitary man, to put a stop to it. He went down to the kitchen to do so. Bess was at the great scrub table, her worn shawl about her, her hands folded. You are scheming, he accused. I am, she said comfortably. Have a biscuit. I will not be matched like a horse at a fair, Bess. It is undignified, and the young woman cannot welcome being thrown at a man's head this way. Have you considered her? She has her own pride. The old nurse fixed him with her sharp, faded eyes, and for once there was no mischief in them, only love grown old and stubborn. I have considered her more than you know, she said. And I have considered you, Master Norris, that I held when you were an hour old. You think I do not see you? Up in that great study year on year, with no soul to speak to but your ledgers and your dead. You were a warm boy. The world made you cold, and grief made you colder, and you have got it into your head that you are meant to be alone. Her voice softened. You are not meant to be alone. No one is. I shall not be here forever to mind you, and I'll not leave you to the silence. So yes, I scheme. Be cross with me if you must. I have weathered your crossness since you were in short coats. The Duke had no answer to that. He stood in his own kitchen, rebuked by a woman half his height and thrice his age, and found that he was not angry at all. He was beneath the bluster, faintly and unexpectedly grateful. And if I do not care for her? He asked at last, more quietly. Bess only looked at him with the long, knowing patience of one who had already seen the answer written plain on his face days ago. Do you not? She said. And the Duke, who could not lie to her, said nothing at all. He found Nesta Wilde that evening in the conservatory. Among the orange trees Bess kept warm against the season. She was not reading. She was sitting very still with her hands in her lap, and when she saw him she rose, and there was a flush of embarrassment on her cheek. Your Grace, I must beg your pardon, she said before he could speak. I have only just understood. Mrs. Hartley has been contriving to throw us together, has she not? I see it now. All these errands. I would not have you think I am party to it. I have no designs upon you, my lord, I promise you. I am a companion of no fortune, and I know my place. I shall ask Lady Crane to send another in my stead, and trouble you no more. The Duke looked at her, at the honest distress in her face, at her plain gown and her unornamented honesty, at this young woman of no fortune who was more concerned for his peace than for any advantage she might have pressed, and he felt something settle in his chest with the quiet finality of a key turning in a long, locked door. Do not go, he said. She blinked. My lord? Do not send another in your stead, and do not ask Lady Crane to spare you. He came a step nearer and clasped his hands behind his back, for he found them unaccountably unsteady. Miss Wilde, I am a difficult man, and a solitary one, and I have spent some days being very cross at being managed. But I have lately had it put to me, by a person I have never once succeeded in arguing with, that I have been alone long enough. He drew a breath. I find she is right. I find I have come to look for you in every room of this house. I find the days you are not here are longer than the days you are. I had not thought at my age and in my temper to feel such a thing again, but I do feel it, and I would be a coward and a fool to let pride send you away rather than say so. The flush on Nesta's cheek had deepened, but she did not lower her eyes. You say this, she said carefully, because your old nurse wishes it? I say it, the Duke answered, because I wish it. Bess only opened the door. I walk through it on my own 2 feet, though I shall never give her the satisfaction of admitting how readily. That drew from Nesta a startled, delighted laugh, low and warm, and the sound of it undid the last of his reserve. I cannot offer you a smooth-tempered husband, he went on more gently, but I can offer you a true one, and a warm house, and a man who will be glad, gladder than he can well say, to look up from his ledgers and find you there. Will you let me court you properly, Nesta Wilde? Slowly and honestly, with no more scheming. I should like to win you, not be handed you. Nesta was quiet a moment. Then she smiled, that gentle, direct smile that had turned the corner of his mouth up on the very first day. I should like that, she said softly, very much. Though I think, your Grace, you ought to know that I had begun to look for you in every room of the house as well, some while ago, and I was ashamed of it and said nothing, being only a companion of no fortune. She lifted her chin, suddenly brave. So perhaps your nurse did not throw us together quite so much as she gave us each leave to stop pretending. The Duke laughed then, a real laugh, rusty with disuse, that rang strange and wonderful in his own ears, and he took her hand and bowed over it, and held it a moment longer than courtesy required, which was the whole of his daring that evening, and was enough. In the doorway of the conservatory, half hidden among the orange leaves with her worn shawl drawn close and her fan idle in her hand, old Bess Hartley watched her boy laugh for the first time in years, and pressed her lips together hard, and let the happy tears stand in her eyes without wiping them away. He courted her honestly through the turning of the year, as he had promised, walks in the cold gardens, long talks by the fire, a slow and proper unfolding that suited them both. He found, to his own astonishment, that he liked to talk. He had been silent so long that he had forgotten the pleasure of it, but Nesta listened the way Bess listened, with her whole attention, and answered with a quick good sense that was forever surprising him into laughter. He told her of the lonely years, and of the great name he carried and had feared to be the last to bear, and she told him of her own small history, the parsonage she had been raised in, the parents she had lost young, the long road of being useful in other people's houses that had brought her at last to his. "You will think me very dull," she said once by the fire, "with no grand story to my name." "I think," said the Duke, "that I have heard a great many grand stories in my life, told by people I could not abide, and not one of them ever made me wish to hear more. You have made me wish to hear everything. I cannot account for it, except that it is you who is telling it." And he saw her colour, and was glad, and Bess, passing the door with a fresh log for the fire, smiled to herself and went quietly on. And when at last heard the great question, on a spring morning with the orange trees in bloom, she said yes before he had quite finished asking, and he kissed her hand, and then, greatly daring, her cheek, and that was the whole of the scandal of it. They were married at Pyckford in the summer, and the old church was full, and the great cold house grew warm at last with company and candlelight, and the low warm laughter of its new mistress. The Duke, who had believed himself the last of his line, and resigned to a solitary end, stood at the altar beside the kind young woman his old nurse had chosen for him, and felt his life turn over like a page into a far better chapter than the one he had thought to finish. Bess Hartley sat in the front pew in her best shawl, worn smooth as silk by long years of service, and looked from her boy to his bride and back again, and when the vows were spoken she gave a small, satisfied nod, the nod of a woman whose last and dearest scheme had come, against all his stubbornness, exactly and entirely right. "You will say it was all your doing," the Duke told her after, finding her among the wedding crowd, and he was smiling. "It was all my doing," said Bess serenely. It was, he agreed, and bent and kissed the top of her grey head as she had kissed his 100 times when he was small. "Thank you, Bess, for not leaving me to the silence. You were right, as you have always been right, and I am the happiest man in the county for it. You picked the girl. You picked her true, and I shall thank you for it every day I live."